Welcome. My name is Randy Zucker. I'm pleased to be here for this Meet the Author series with our esteemed moderator, in-house moderator Lisa Bleish. Many thanks to Karen Sanders for helping to put these programs together. Thank you. She deserves that applause.
Thank you, Randy.
Before we get started, just a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. Please know that today's Zoom is being recorded, and so I'll be keeping everyone on mute so that we don't have any ambient noise. But feel free to submit any and all questions in the chat box, and we will review them at the end of the program with a Q&A period. In addition, please forgive any technical issues we might encounter during the program. And notice in the chat, there will be links to purchase copies of Places We Left Behind. And we also will include it in all email communications. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Miss Lisa Bleish. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Shana Tova. As Randy said, I'm Lisa Bleish, and I'm not only the chair of the One Book, One Jewish Community Book Read, but I also am the in-house author moderator, one of my favorite hats that I wear. I hope everyone has wonderful New Year, everyone has peace, health, and happiness, and that if you're fasting, that you have a meaningful fast for Yom Kippur. So excited to introduce our guest today. Born in San Francisco, Bay Area, Jennifer Lang, or Jennifer, as I learned to met her, lives in Tel Aviv, where she runs the Israel Writers Studio. Her essays have appeared in the Baltimore Review, Crab Orchard Review, Under the Sun, Ascent, Consequence, and elsewhere. A Pushcart Prize and Best American Essays nominee, she holds an MFA from Vermont College of Fine Arts and serves as an assistant editor for Brevity, a journal of concise literary nonfiction. You can often find her on her yoga mat, practicing since 1995, teaching since 2003, legs up her living room wall. Places We Left Behind is her first book, and Landed, a memoir in pieces and poses, will follow in October 2024. So we'll have to have you back for that. As an American French Israeli hybrid, Jennifer writes about mostly her divided self, Israel, and home. And the heart of the book is about finding a way to coexist in a family while still existing as your own person. As on a personal note, Jennifer and I met in 1985. We were the two Californians, she from Northern, me from Southern, who were on the Sweetbriar Junior Year Abroad program in Paris. And we immediately hit it off. We immediately connected. We even found a place in Tours to go to Rosh Hashanah services, if you remember that. And I've been with her on this journey, and I'm quelling. I'm so proud of this wonderful gem of a memoir that she put out in the world. And I'm just delighted to be able to bring her here to share her story. So welcome, Jenny Fail. Jen.
Thank you. I forgot to bring Kleenex. Shana Tova, and usually it's from Tel Aviv, but escaped the heat and the rest of the holidays, and I've started this book tour all wrapped around the release of my first book and my 40th high school reunion. I've never been in the same state, city, country, continent as any reunion, so it's tomorrow night and a really big deal for me. Okay, so I'm going to start with a pretty short PowerPoint presentation, remember? So I'm going to share screen. Oops, hold on. So I forget, am I sharing my screen? Is that how this works? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
There we go.
Everybody with me?
Awesome.
Okay. So the title of the book is Places We Left Behind, a memoir in miniature. And a lot of people are asking what the miniature is about, which we'll see if we get to it. So I grew up in the same house, on the same street, in the same city, in the same state for my first 18 years, 116 Monticello Avenue, in a small city surrounded by Oakland on all sides in Northern California. It's called Piedmont. And I just went back there last October to take this picture. In 1971, at age 5 and almost 6, my last month, my parents pulled me out of my last month of kindergarten, and we took this huge family trip to Israel to meet our extended family. So this is my great Baba, who came from Romania with her impoverished, illiterate, the whole thing, with her husband and 6 children. They went directly to San Francisco, where they had extended family, which was actually my Zeta. And 2 of the 6, the kids were brought up in Hashomer HaTzair, a very Zionist youth group, and 2 of the 6 went to Palestine in 1947. So that was them greeting us at the airport. And 4 years later, I went with my family from Northern California on a family mission. My second trip, that's me planting a tree. And on that trip, my great Baba by that point was living there full time. After her husband died in San Francisco, she upped and went to be in Haaretz. This is my family unit, and then this is with my extended family. And so I spent my childhood going to this very far away place in a way that no one else did in my Northern California Jewish world. On that same trip, on our last night, in my memory, we were at a dinner where we met with Moshe Dayan, and sadly my face is cut off, but that's me. In 1981, I went back with my youth group, 6 weeks, and 3 weeks picking weeds on a kibbutz near Oz. Up at, my memory is 3:30 in the morning. I'm sure it wasn't that early, but it's definitely what it felt like. And on that same trip with my best friends, Judy and Marcia, we did the classic go up Masada, Western Wall. And today, Judy is married to an Israeli and has been living in Israel, and she's a pediatrician there. She's been there 35 years. And we grew up Reform on the West Coast. So it's very different than where you are in New Jersey. I just want to add that. On that trip, I saw my great aunt and great uncle because they always came wherever I was. And in 1985-86, my junior year abroad in Paris, this is Lisa and me. We shared a room in a French host family. This was our very Catholic, extreme right-wing Le Pen, not Marie, but Jean Le Pen family. And from Paris, I went back to Israel in winter break to see my sibling who had made Aliyah and was serving in the IDF, and my great aunt and great uncle and cousins. So there was a pull, a really, really big pull. In 1989, my 8th trip, I went with between a job in Paris that I had quit and graduate school in America. And I went for what was supposed to be 4, maximum 5 months, promising my mom I wouldn't stay. I wouldn't fall in love and stay. And 5 weeks after I got there, I fell in love and stayed. So this is my then boyfriend, now husband, Philippe. And my parents came on a mission about a month into my new relationship. And so this is Philippe and me flirting literally behind my dad's back. And my parents came a month in, but I moved in with Philippe. They were still in the country. They rented a car and moved me in with Philippe after 2 months. So in the summer of '89, we are 23, turning 24, and completely playing house in Haifa. Philippe was a new immigrant from France at the end of his engineering program. And that fall, things were moving quickly. I went to Strasbourg to meet his parents. And a year later, after a very unromantic proposal, we wed. And this is my friend who's the pediatrician who lives in Israel, and a friend from college and a friend from Paris who came for the wedding. And I had to go to the mikvah because that's how the Rabbanut does it in Israel. So this is just a couple of pictures from our wedding. My Romanian grandmother came, and she actually was in the country at that point for 4 months between my brother's wedding and my wedding, doing a little bit like what her mother had done. Us painting our first apartment, 1990 in Haifa. This is me with my grandmother from San Francisco, well, from Romania, and her brother, her youngest brother. She was the oldest of 6, and he was the youngest of 6. So he was an Egged bus driver for 40 years, living in and raising a family in Hadera. Last year, on a trip to Paris, I went back to my apartment in Paris, where after 5 years in Haifa, we moved to Paris for a year with our 1-year-old. I couldn't remember the address. So this is me with my daughter saying, could this be it? It wasn't. From Paris, we moved to Oakland, California. It was supposed to be a 1-year stay. It ended up getting extended. And we lived a half a mile down the road from my parents. And there we brought 2 children into the world, 2 daughters. And it was that same year, a few months after landing in California, that I first stepped onto a yoga mat. That ended up becoming a very huge part of my journey. This was our second house, bigger, to welcome our 3rd child into the world, another half a mile down from my parents in a different direction. And this is just pictures of little children. And then we moved to White Plains, New York, this house. And I agreed to move only if we bought a house. So we did, and my husband was working in the city. And because we got a 6-year itch in 2007, we upped our 3 children, uprooting our lives, and we went to Ra'anana, Israel, where my husband's company was based, for a year, living in this house. And then we moved back to New York until 2011, when we boarded a one-way flight back to Israel and sent all of our belongings on a Zim container. So, been around.
All right. Well, thank you for bringing everyone up to date on kind of your peripatetic lifestyle and all the different places that you've been. So I don't know if anyone's had a chance to read the book, and I highly recommend that you get it. But one of the things that's really remarkable and unique about it is your writing style. It's almost as if you're using the words to draw out your emotions. So I'm wondering what gave you the idea to use that technique? Was it intuitive, or did it just flow like that?
It's a combination. It's craft. It's going to graduate school and learning about the craft of writing, and then having 7 years go by from the first iteration of this, which was about 90,000 words, to this iteration, which is 13,000 words, and crafting it. Mm-hmm. But where it really ended up felt more organic. There's a very strong visual element. I do things I've never done before, from strike through text to endnotes to illustrations. I'm not doing illustrations. I learned everything. Thank God for YouTube tutorials on how to work with Word. I didn't hire a designer. It didn't even occur to me. And I'm not artistic, but that aspect of it, what I did where I'm not using words, was something organic that just kind of came from within. I don't know where it came from.
Yeah, it's amazing when you see it. There's all these little, just the way that you put the words together, it does form a visual in terms of when you're reading it, and it does give you a different feeling. How did you remember everything?
One thing is journals. I had kept a lot of journals, not consistently, but enough that I could go back to them. Another is photo albums, hugely helpful. But I think the real thing that helped me was my mom, my aunt, and one of my very dear friends who makes an appearance in the book, both at the beginning and the end, sent me back my letters from the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s. Thank God for all those letter writing days we had. And I got reacquainted with my younger self through those letters. And it was probably the biggest gift that they have ever given me.
Were there, when you were reading back through those letters, were there things that you had forgotten, and then when you look back on it, you thought, oh my God, what was I thinking? Or why did I write it like this? Or what was going on?
I actually had to reframe my narrative, because I spent the past 2.5 decades pointing a finger at my husband saying, I'm here because of him. But what I came to understand in rereading my letters was that before even meeting him I was 23, and I was in Israel on my own there because I was questioning, did I belong there? My brother did. My girlfriend Judy did. My great aunt and uncle, my great uncle did I? And I didn't remember that. I had blocked that part of my story out. And so I had to go back into it and say, like, I had my own connection, and it was really strong.
Yeah. Yeah, because there were all of that pull to it. I even remember when we were, back in 1985, you were always talking about going to Israel, and you had this very strong connection even back then. What does Philippe think of the book? I mean, does he feel like he was accurately portrayed, and about your kids?
Yeah. So my kids probably will never read it. My oldest is 30. He can't even, in the second chapter, I use the word making love. And as soon as I read that sentence, he was like, stop. I don't want to hear this. So I don't think, and my kids are 30, 26, and 24. They will each get a copy of the book. I don't think they'll read it for the next 10 years. I think they still need to do some growing up and some separating from us. My husband read it finally. He had given me permission to write about us back when I was in graduate school, when the whole project came to be. I had to ask his permission. I think there's a very big gap between asking someone's permission and actually signing a book deal. So I think he probably never believed it would happen. I mean, I didn't either, honestly. But it took him until the week before I had to submit the manuscript to the developmental editor last December to finally sit down and read it, because he was petrified. He was uncomfortable. That was the first word. He was uncomfortable, but he was really petrified that I portrayed him and my sibling as villains. And I kept trying to say to him, this is a love story. So, right. So
Steamy. There's some steamy scenes in there, in the beginning, when you kind of you sort of have that first moment when you guys are falling in love. I mean, that does that kind of rekindle that feeling for you now, 33 years later, or however many years later?
I think first I went through some hard stuff. In the longer version that I put together, when I was really digging back into a lot of the memories, the hard moments, the hard conversations, the therapy, I actually did not realize that the writing of it could bring some of those feelings back, and it wasn't good. So I first went through that. That was already a few years ago. When it got to this version, the whole text is very playful, and our relationship has always been very playful. And so the fact that it, for me, feels playful, reads playfully, I think, is like a fabulous mirror of our relationship, honestly. So what did he think? So he finally read it, and I had to kind of beg for feedback, because he sent me he sent me, not a typo, he sent me a comment from his computer around the corner from mine. Our home office is in Tel Aviv. He sent me 2 comments. One was, it was his father who taught him how to put on the tefillin, not his grandfather. And I was like, if you think it, but honestly, I think it was your grandfather. And the second one was some sentence that he thought was unclear. And I was like, is that it? Is that all the feedback? So we had this really incredibly frank conversation about him saying to me, I don't have all the memories you have. I don't know how you remembered all of that. Of the memories I do have, they're not all the same as yours. But when I was reading it, all I could think of was, I can't believe we stayed together.
Yeah. It's amazing that you did. You talk a lot about, sort of the big conflict in the book is kind of this resistance that you had to Philippe's lifestyle, more observant, living in Israel, keeping Shomer Shabbos. And in yoga, there's a sense of surrendering into a position, into Shavasana. And you talk a little bit about your own resistance to Shavasana. So at what point did you surrender, and how did it change your perception both about Philippe's lifestyle and Shavasana?
That's a question. I was resistant to the final resting pose in yoga for a very practical reason in the beginning. I was paying a babysitter sometimes. It was my days off from work. I was working part-time for the Jewish Federation in San Francisco. My son was in part-time preschool. And I carved out this 2-hour time frame to go to a yoga class, 2-hour classes, crazy.
Nice. And that's a long time.
That's a long time, but it was because it was my starting point. I actually didn't know there was anything different out there. And so I was paying a babysitter sometimes. And hell, if I was going to pay a babysitter to lie down on my mat and close my eyes. I was like, what the hell? But nothing about that made sense to me. So my resistance was purely financial and practical for a very long time. My first 6 years. But then we moved to the East Coast, our lifestyle changed. I needed help. We got au pairs, and I was able to go more freely to yoga. And I think the surrender to Shavasana came not immediately. I still thought it was really weird to lie down and close my eyes. I don't know when it came, but I'll tell you what I was resistant to for 10 years and I've written about, which was saying Om, chanting Om. Couldn't.
Yeah.
I was hearing amen. I mean, like I have real hangups, right, about religion. All I could hear when people were chanting Om was amen. And I would sit there thinking, I mean, sometimes surrounded by 50 people in a weekday class in California. And I would think, do these people not have religion in their lives? Don't they have enough religion in their lives? Because I've got religion stuffed down my throat in my life. Between my sibling, who was ultra Orthodox at that point, my spouse, who kept Shabbat, our modern Orthodox community. And I was just like, I don't need more religion. I don't need it in my exercise. So I was really resistant. At what point did I surrender? To Om, it was 10 years. To Shavasana, probably the 7 or 8 year period. To understanding the place that yoga held for me spiritually, way after that. Way beyond. It took a lot more of growing up on my part.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting, in green light, red light, you describe that. So this is the chapter where you're in Paris for the year, and then Philippe has finished his MBA, and you're about to move to Oakland to be back with your family, and then you get your dream job in Paris. That's not about writing, but it's about more in international relations, right? Which meant that you could stay in Paris, but then your good daughter guilt takes over and you pass on the job. Can you talk a little bit about that decision and why it seemed like you gave up all of your own opportunities to please everyone but yourself?
Should have brought Kleenex here. So I'm gonna couch it like this and hope that this answers. In the world of memoir writing, we often look and say, this is a memoir of X. So if you've ever read Frank McCourt, Angela's Ashes, it's a memoir of childhood. We have memoirs of obsession, memoirs of illness, memoirs of addiction, memoirs of often childhood, Mary Carr, childhood, The Liars Club. Yeah. And I think this is a memoir of voice and how I gave up my voice as a very young woman enwrapped in a relationship. And I don't think, I hear your question. I don't think I understood in the moment at the time. I was still 29 years old when that happened, that all I was doing was continuing to give up my voice. I thought Philippe at that moment where he was like, it's up to you. For me, it felt like he was empowering me to make the decision. But I couldn't call my parents and say, we're not coming. Sorry, things changed. I just couldn't. Yeah. I think when I look back at my childhood with an older sibling who held the role of rebel and ultra smart, and I think I didn't have a voice in my childhood home, but I didn't know that. I don't think I understood all that until now.
But on the flip side, it brought you to yoga. You know, it brought you to all of these other things that allowed you to find your voice. Yeah. So I think that, you know, things always do happen for a reason, even if maybe you don't know why.
Well, I think it's why I write. I think it's why I write. Yeah. It's like my effort. You know, this book is about voice, and I think that what I'm doing is finally saying, like, okay, here I am. I have something to tell you. I have something to say. Please listen. Please read. And it took me all these years to like get it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's, for a lot of people, I think that's the case when they get there. I had the opportunity to spend Shabbat with you, with your family when you guys lived in White Plains. And from the outside, it looked like it was, you know, a very warm and inviting community, a really strong sense of community. Was there any aspect of Shabbat that you enjoyed?
We had an amazing community, both in Oakland, California for 6 years and in White Plains for 9. I loved the community part of it. I know that in the moment I could say, and I look back now and I will still say, I loved Friday nights. I didn't love Friday afternoon, especially in the winter, where by 2 o'clock, Philippe would be home and we were in the kitchen making dinner, especially if we were entertaining or if we were just, getting food ready for our own young children. But we had to cook for Friday and Saturday. And I just, like, nothing about that ever made sense to me. I didn't see what was wrong with cooking on Saturday, right? Because I didn't believe what he believed. And so he was always stressed. The level of stress was very high. And so that aspect I didn't like, but once Friday night descended, if we were alone with our kids, we were bathed in pajamas, hunkering down, especially in the winter, reading books, playing games. We raised kids playing a lot of board games, and it was beautiful. What I really couldn't stand was as soon as I woke up on Saturday. And the older I got, the harder that got. For me, Shabbat,
And so once you
great at Friday night, and then like be done.
be done, right? It was the reform was Friday night, and that's
Move
it,
on.
right? So once you came clean, right, and you stopped observing Shabbat, what changed?
That coming clean didn't happen for a really, 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 really long time. It did not happen while raising young kids. I towed the line. I did as well as I could. We sent them to modern Orthodox day schools, both in Northern California and in New York. And I vowed to myself, and I said to Philippe, and it was thanks to tremendous therapy, that once we moved to Israel in 2011, I would be me. But it didn't happen overnight. My girls were still teenagers, and I couldn't not go to shul on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, or they would be the girls sitting alone on the women's side of the mechitza without their mother, right? I had to still show up. So I had to still show up. So I was still wrestling. It took me a while before I could really come clean. It's in the next book, Landed, a yogi's memoir in pieces and poses.
Okay, we'll have to look at that. What would you go back and tell the newly married Jen and Philippe, or a newly married couple who have different religions, backgrounds, or levels of religiosity, because that's so much more common now?
So it's actually happening, but it's not so much about religion, right? It can be about anything. So my youngest is 24 in a new relationship. And she and her fabulous American-born boyfriend, whose family moved to Haifa, ironically, kind of 2 years after we left in the 90s. He was raised in Israel. He's the most polite Israeli I've ever met in my life because he's really American. They came on like their 5th date, because their dates are like spending an entire Shabbat either in Haifa or Tel Aviv, where he lives or where she lives. And they came for dinner on a Friday night, and we had company. And between dinner and dessert, my daughter and Zach, stand up and say, "We have to go. We're meeting a friend of Zach's at a bar." And my husband and I were like, "We don't do this. We stay together for dinner on Friday night." And we didn't say anything. We didn't want to create a problem or a scene. And we let them go. And 2 days later, my daughter came over, and I said to her, "Hey, what happened on Friday night? Did you want to leave?" And she said, "No. Zach had made plans with a friend, and she had tried to say to him that she wanted to stay for dinner at her parents', but he insisted they go to the bar." And I said to her, "You have to make sure that he hears you. You have to hold on to your voice." So it's not, right? It's not just about this. It's about that and that and that. It's in the workplace. It's everywhere. It's everywhere.
If your kids haven't read your memoir, and you don't think that they will, and it sounded like through much of their growing up, you didn't really voice your views, do you feel like that they'll listen to you when you say that, or do they feel it's contradictory? Do they even know that you didn't recognize your voice?
Do they know now, you mean?
Yeah, do they know now? Do they recognize that there's something different?
Yes, no, they know now. And, I don't know if everyone here has children or how old or how insightful. So I have 2 out of 3 with pretty low EQs, and 1 super in the middle, super insightful since very young age. She really gets it. She really, yes, no, they know now. They know everything. I've completely come clean. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting in Jitters, which is the chapter after you get married, Philippe says, "Do you feel like we've just made things complicated? My parents are in one country, yours in another, and we're in a third." And then you jokingly reply, "Well, we'll just have to spend 7 years in each place." And then I just remember how much you, as a, always traveling, everywhere, going between San Francisco, France, Israel, and everywhere in between. And that just became commonplace to your lives. How do you think that constant travel has impacted your kids and kind of the way that they view culture and home?
Yeah, that is an amazing question. I think they each suffer in a way. I look now and I say I have one American child with my middle one. So we moved to Israel when he was 18 because he went to do the army and my girls were 12 and 14. So I'll start from the top. I have one Israeli. He's the 30-year-old now. I'm pretty sure he and his wife will stay in Israel. I have one American who, after the army, said, this country is too small. I feel suffocated. A little bit like things I used to say. And she went back to the States for college and she stayed. So she lives in Manhattan. She works. She's really happy. And I don't know if she'll ever come back to Israel. And I have, strangely enough, but in the same way it goes with your question, one Asian kid who's currently in Vietnam, learning Vietnamese, studying Asian studies at Tel Aviv University, speaks Mandarin fluently, learned Japanese for the past 2 years in school, and will probably end up somewhere in Asia. Why? Because these kids have 3 passports, which everyone asks, isn't that illegal? Well, I don't know who's going to take them away from us, so we do have them. And this incredible openness to the world. And for the good and the bad, for the richness that it brings, for the feeling of not knowing where home is that it also brings. Like an army brat or a diplomat kid. I mean, the only thing I can say to my kids is, we're in Tel Aviv. We just put every shekel into an apartment in the center of the city. So please come and visit if you come. We're right across the street from Shuk HaCarmel, if you know it. We're not going anywhere. I think we hung our last visit.
Okay, so you guys you're staying put. So it's complicatedly wonderful, I think, is a way to think about it, right? There's kind of both in there. It's interesting because you call the memoir Places Left Behind, or Places We Left Behind. However, I'm curious as to what you found for your journey.
A lot of love, a lot of really fabulous friendships. I am on this 6-week trip right now. This is my first week where I feel like this is your life, Jennifer. I am seeing friends from high school at a reunion and then at a book event next week, camp, people I haven't seen for 30 to 40 years, youth group, trip to Israel. So I first am in California for 3 weeks through the holidays, and then in New York where we raised kids. So both in the city and then up in Westchester doing a ton of events. And then I fly to Paris. Philippe goes to see his parents in Strasbourg and meets me in Paris. And I have a lot of people that I love who I've left along the way, who I'm seeing along this journey. And it's so cool. It's so cool.
Yeah.
At the same time, I don't have what you all might have, which is, this maybe group of friends that we raised kids together and we watched our kids grow up and we're inviting each other to our kids' weddings if they're getting married. Like, I don't have that. And there's kind of I could dwell on the sad and the holes and say what I don't have, or I can say, I have this other thing.
Right.
I have this other thing.
I mean, everyone has something different. I don't think one is better or worse. It's just kind of what you have and kind of how you've made your life in terms of that.
Yeah.
It's interesting because now that you've had some clarity on it, why do you think keeping Shabbat was so important to Philippe? Like, were you able to get at the root differences and eventually satisfy your, each other's needs without feeling like one of you was either betrayed or was sacrificing something?
Well, there's the then and the now. So then I would say he clung to Judaism while we were living in America, where I married what feels like the Frenchman who never wanted to live in America. I think there's a lot of them who dream of it, and I got the one who, wanted nothing to do.
Yeah, you got the one who wasn't an Americophile, right?
Right.
Right.
And so for him, having shul and having that community and having his kids go to these schools, learning. I mean, he and I both went to public school. He did not grow up like this. So I think then those 16 years in America was like a clinging for him to something that was his own, to something where he felt more comfortable. I would say now what I'm seeing with age and with our new life in Tel Aviv, we have a friend group. We're 8 couples, and half keep Shabbat and half don't. And there's tremendous respect. And everybody eats off of everybody's dishes and everybody's kitchens, and it's fabulous. And he has loosened up so much. So where we went to Israel in 2011, I had to say to him, look, I'm not just going to eat in only kosher restaurants, reminding him. I would tell you that now his favorite restaurant in Tel Aviv is not kosher. We ride bikes on Shabbat to go to friends who live like 40 minutes by foot and would rather be on a bike than by foot. So like he's really, and he used to never ride bikes on Shabbat because if a bike breaks down and you have to repair it, it's work. So we did not raise kids riding bikes on Shabbat. Oh yeah, no, the technicalities here, they're extreme. They're extensive. So he's really loosened up a lot. We go to the beach on Shabbat. We hang out and watch go into the water. We go watch the sunset. He's fabulously loosened up.
So ironically, moving to Israel actually made you enjoy Shabbat on Saturday as well, not just on Friday night. So it actually turned out to be a gamzlatov, right? That you were able to surrender to it. Now that you're in, one of the things that you mentioned in the book is kind of this overriding anxiety and fear, like, the first times that you're living in Israel. And then, of course, you moved to New York right before 9/11. And then now, and you were also afraid of your kids going through the military. So you moved back right for your oldest son to be in the military. So now that your kids have gone through the military, what's changed? Do you feel differently about your initial fears?
Oof. No, I think I feel differently about the world and about the country where I was born. I feel like it's really not safe anywhere. It's just different levels, different kinds of safety, different kinds of issues. So for Israel, it's not on the street level. The street level, we're super safe. I mean, if someone falls in the middle of a crosswalk or anywhere, like that person will be surrounded. Any people stop and help. It's something I've never seen in America. In May of 2021, we had, I forget how many days, 3 days of sirens and really crazy missiles going on. And we lived in an apartment building on a street where there were a lot of buses. And one of the missiles and sirens was in the middle of a work day. And we did not have a bomb shelter in our apartment. We ran down the stairwell to the bottom of the stairs, an open stairwell. And before I knew it, the door to the apartment building, kind of 6 steps up, was opening. And people were coming in. The bus had stopped in front of our building and was letting people off, saying, go run for shelter. And they were coming with baby carriages and grocery carts. And people from our apartment building were going up the 6 stairs to the front door to help them down with their baby carriages and into our space. And it was just like, okay, this is really like an only in Israel moment. There's a lot of that. So I think for me, I look at America as, you need to know I didn't feel this way in 2011 when we left. It was Obama. It was a whole different America. Yes, there were shootings. Yes, there were wildfires. Yes, there was homelessness. But today, 2023, those things have been amplified in a way that I just feel like it's not so nice anymore. And the problems are the same and different at the same time. And we have our shit. We definitely, pardon my language, we have our mishigas, we have our issues, the big geopolitical, and we can't control it. But you know what? I kind of prefer it because it feels more meaningful in a weird, twisted way.
More twisted way. So you come full circle back to that pull and you kind of finally understand it.
Yeah.
You left your story, right? When you accept for your marriage and family to survive that you need to be open to Israel, and you even created a blog with that name. Are you now? It sounds like you are. It sounds like you've become.
Yeah. Short answer.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'd love to open it up to questions. Does anyone have any questions? Please put them in the chat, or you could unmute yourself if you want, if that would be easier. Any questions?
I have a question. I mean, you touched on it at points, but what drove you? You know, I feel like you've always been a writer. You have journals and letter writing. Like, what was the impetus for deciding to try to get this published?
I think the turning point happened in 2014 when I went to graduate school. So I had had the desire back in New York, kind of 2009, 2010, 2011. And our therapist that we were seeing urged me to apply so that when I landed in 2011, I had this thing for myself. But it wasn't the right time. I needed to make sure my girls were settled and start a yoga studio. And I had other things going on. So I waited. And I waited until I felt really ready because I chose to go to, very privileged to say, I chose to go to graduate school in the States where for 2 years, I was every 6 months, I was getting on a plane and going to this program for this very 11-day intensive period with my peers, my cohorts, and mentors. And then you go home, and for the next 5 months, you're working remotely. And that 2 years of that being immersed in this writing community and working really high level with mentors and really brought my writing to a new level, my understanding of the craft to a new level. And then I was watching all of my peers publish books because that's what you do when you come out of these programs. Most people, that's the goal. I think I went in with the goal, but I didn't know how to do it. I mean, it's such a long process, this whole thing. This for me, I call this my book baby. This is my 7-year book baby. Long pregnancy, long gestation. And there's a compelling that happened through that process. Through those years in graduate school, I felt compelled to write. I would wake up in the middle of the night and have essay ideas like pouring out of me. I was on my butt at my desk for hours writing. And then you feel compelled to get it published and compelled to share the story. I don't know how to explain that other than.
Did you then feel the same compulsion once you finished to start your second?
No, it didn't happen so linearly. It's really messy. The second one was what I was working on finding a publisher for when the first one came out of an older iteration, an older version, and a friend emailed me to say, "Hey, I'm submitting my short, pieces to a chapbook competitions. I think you should pull your older stories out if they have, if they're linked thematically. You might want to look into this." So I was really deep into the submission process for Landed, my second book, when this was brought to my attention. So I went back into the older 90,000, 65,000 word documents, pulled out those earlier pieces, put them together, and started to submit them. So this came, it seemed like there was intention for this to be first and then Landed to follow, but it was absolutely unintentional.
Yeah. Karen wants to know, as an American living in Israel, do you relate more to the Americans or Israelis?
I think when I'm in Israel, I'm completely American. I think when I'm in America, I'm not sure who I am. And when I'm in France, I dream of being mistaken for French.
Because American, right? It's always what we were, right?
Still. And in France, I have been told on numerous occasions that I have an American head. And I just think, what the hell does that mean? That's who I am.
Any other questions? Please put them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. Right. Oh, you just got cut up. All right. Well, thank you so much. It was such a delight to have you here and share and hearing your story. And thank you so much for putting it out there and having your voice. You have a wonderful voice, and we want to hear more of it. So thank you.
Thank you for letting us sit in on your conversation. It was really warm and fun to listen to you guys.
Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you. Wishing you all the best, Jennifer, and wishes for Shana Tova a happy new year to you and to everyone. Have a great day. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
shalom.
Thanks, Jennifer, for this great story and the vulnerability to share it.
Dominique's in my book club.